Chapter 37. The body of the raging wind tiger needed to be dealt with as soon as possible. Although it was a monster, its body would not rot so easily, but the magic in its body would gradually dissipate over time. If it was not dealt with for too long, the effect of the meat would be reduced by more than half. Sulen naturally would not allow this to happen. Therefore, the first thing he did when he returned was to deal with the tiger. At this time, Su Luan suddenly realized that he probably didn't know how to deal with the meat of the magical beasts. Cooking the meat in the ordinary way would cause a large amount of mana in the meat to be lost, so people developed a special way to deal with it. System, is there a recipe to deal with monster meat? Sulen asked, rubbing his head. There are recipes for sale in the shop. The host can buy them yourself. There's a recipe in the shop. You should have said so earlier. Hearing the system notification, Sulen quickly opened the shop interface and quickly found a recipe to deal with monster materials. He looked at the price, 100 kinnar. Sulen's little bit of money was directly emptied out. After buying the formula for the disposal of magical beast materials, Su Luan found that this formula was definitely worth the money. Not only did the formula have various ways to deal with magical beast meat, but it also had other ways to deal with blood, internal organs, bones, and fur. It could be said that it was a comprehensive book on the disposal of magical beast materials. Men. After looking at the recipe, Sulen immediately began to act. Boss, what are your orders? A barbarian warrior jogged over and asked. Go get a few water tanks, fill them with water, and prepare a big pot, the biggest one. The raging wind tiger was heavier than an adult elephant. Although it was not a super large creature, it was still very troublesome to deal with. The blood of the raging wind tiger was a good material, and he needed a glass tank to preserve it. However, Sulen did not have a glass tank, so he planned to use water to make a refrigerator to store the blood. The most valuable parts of the raging wind tiger were its heart, fur, and tiger penis. Sulen's profit from skinning was average, but the barbarians were masters of skinning. As a tribe in the wilderness, they consumed large amounts of prey every day, so they often needed to skin their prey. This allowed them to practice their skinning skills. After seeing the water tank, Sulen's hand emitted a bone-piercing chill. This was one of the ways to control the mystic frost blade. Sulen had figured it out to practice the skill. Sulen manipulated this power and quickly created a refrigerator. Then, the two barbarians took out knives and cut open a wound on the tiger's neck. Blood that contained magic power slowly flowed out. Because the demonic tiger had already died, some of its blood had already stopped circulating. It needed to be continuously patted by humans to expel the blood from its body. In the end, it took 2 full boxes of blood to complete the task. Next was skinning. The 2 barbarian warriors held sharp skinning knives and carefully cut the tiger's skin. Everyone's cutting speed was very slow. It wasn't that they didn't want to be fast, but that the fury wind tiger's skin was too tough. A skinning knife soon blunted and needed to be polished again. Fortunately, the barbarians had enough chi. After some effort, they finally finished skinning the tiger's skin completely. The tiger's skin was huge. After all, the tiger was 8 meters long. When spread out, it was more than 40 square meters. If this tiger's skin was used to make leather armor, it could easily make 30 pieces. If it was used to make magic scrolls, it could easily make up to 100 pieces. If such a demonic tiger hide were to be auctioned in Cult City, it would fetch at least 3,000 gold coins. If it was made into leather armor and enchanted by an enchantment master, as long as it was successful, the leather armor could easily be sold for thousands of gold coins. Moreover, the tiger's skin was a top material for making wizard robes. It would be sold as soon as it appeared. After peeling off the tiger's skin, Su Luan began to cut off the tiger's flesh. He first cut off the tiger's penis and then made an ice box to store it in. This thing could be sold to nobles for at least 5,000 gold coins. Even if he didn't sell it, he could still enjoy it. The tiger's teeth and bones were also removed. The tiger's heart and other organs were all taken out. The tiger's tail was also put away. It could be made into a whip. Finally, Su Len separated the tiger's spine, which was more than 7 meters long, and sealed it in ice. The tiger's heart was very big. It was twice the size of a basketball. Even if it was dead, one could still feel the shocking magic waves in the heart. The tiger's heart was the main material for making a magic potion. The most famous one was the Tiger King Awakening Potion. Using this potion could turn a normal person into a sorcerer. Of course, this potion was powerful, but so were the side effects. If one couldn't survive it, their bloodline would collapse and they would die on the spot. If one could survive it, they would awaken as a sorcerer and become a powerful spellcaster. Therefore, although it was dangerous, many people were still willing to try it. A tiger's heart could be used to make 10 bottles of Tiger King Awakening Potion. The price of a tiger's heart wasn't low either. It could be sold for at least 5,000 kinnar to wizards. These wizards would then turn it into potions. One bottle could be sold for 5,000 kinnar. If all of them were sold, the profit would be at least 10 times. However, this couldn't be helped. Only a few wizards and alchemists could make a small amount of this potion. After cutting up the tiger's meat, Su Len asked the barbarians to start a fire. He then took out all kinds of spices and other food to cook. The fire rose, and the water in the iron pot began to boil. Su Len poured the spices he prepared into the iron pot. Then, he put the tiger's meat into the pot. Soon, a strange fragrance spread out from the iron pot. Su Len felt his mouth watering. He couldn't help but want to take a bite. Even the barbarians behind him couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Su Len took out a piece of cooked tiger's meat and took a bite. It was tender and smooth. It was delicious. The other barbarians also stared at the meat in Su Len's hand. After eating the tiger's meat in a few bites, Su Len patted his stomach with satisfaction. A warm energy flowed back and forth in his body. It made Su Len feel like his whole body was soaking in a hot spring. It was very comfortable. Okay, eat. Look at you guys. You can't even take a piece of meat. Su Len took a few pieces of tiger's meat and threw it to the barbarians. After getting the meat, the barbarians didn't hold back. They opened their mouths and bit into the meat. Soon, they felt a warm current flowing through their bodies. Su Len looked at the meat. This kind of cooked meat was recognized by the system. P.S. Thank you to Night God Underworld Emperor for the 500 Chidian coins tip. Chapter 38. Magic Tiger Jerky, made from the meat of a Gale tiger and added a dozen spices. Delicious. Can quickly replenish stamina and slightly increase physique. Has special effects after consumption. Gain +2 strength and +2 dexterity for 2 hours after consumption. Gain +1 strength for the first consumption. Gain +2 strength cumulatively. A Gale tiger like this would make at least 2 tons of jerky. Luckily, Su Len had asked his men to prepare a few big pots. Otherwise, it would take at least a day or two to cook all the meat. Also, the best time to prepare the Gale tiger meat was 6 hours. If it wasn't done after 6 hours, the remaining meat would go bad, and the effect of the meat would be reduced by a lot. 2 hours later, all the tiger meat had been prepared. The fragrant jerky was piled up into a small hill in the yard. This kind of jerky could be stored for 3 years even if it wasn't specially stored. If it was stored in a special warehouse, it could even be stored for 10 years without a problem. After the jerky was stored in the warehouse, Su Len could finally relax. Apart from the jerky, there were no wizards in the territory who could handle the other materials. He could only wait until he recruited a wizard. As for selling them directly, that was the least profitable option. He gave all the barbarian warriors 3 pieces of jerky and told them to go back and eat. The amount of jerky was just enough to maximize the effect. Eating more would be a waste. After dealing with the storm tiger, Su Len had time to check the other rewards given by the system. Leveling up had rewarded him with 2 attribute points and 2 skill points. Completing the quest had rewarded him with +1 to all attributes. In addition, eating the storm tiger's meat had increased his strength by 2 points. It could be said that this quest had brought him 9 attribute points so far, which was more than he gained from leveling up 4 times. Su Len added the 2 attribute points to strength. Now, his strength had reached 31 points. As for the attribute points, he didn't learn any new skills. Instead, he upgraded his heal skill to physique healing. Physique healing, after use, it can quickly heal more serious injuries. Name: Sullen Race. Human Strength, 31 Dexterity, 29 Will, 24 Vitality, 29 Charm, 19 Free Attribute Points, 0 Skill Points, 0 Skills. Omitted. After testing the effects of physical healing, he found that the effects of physical healing were twice as effective as life healing. However, the consumption of physical healing was the same. After testing the skill, Su Len took out the golden treasure chest from his storage space. Compared to the silver treasure chest, the gold treasure chest had a much more extravagant appearance. It was completely golden in color and gave off a rich aura. After opening the treasure chest, a burst of spiritual light dissipated, and a peculiar banner appeared before him. Congratulations, host, you have obtained the Wind Dragon flag. They looked like 2 small tornadoes with a few lightning bolts inside. This kind of wind elementals had very low intelligence, so Su Len could command and control them at will with the power of the Wind Dragon flag. Although the 2 wind elementals had low combat power, they were masters at cleaning. They floated in the air like powerful vacuum cleaners. With a whoosh, the trash, dust, and grass on the ground were brought to the trash bin by the wind elementals. They even provided the service of cutting grass. After a whirlwind blew by, even the grass was cleaned up. From that day onwards, Su Len had 2 more automatic smart vacuum cleaners. He also named the 2 wind elementals Vacuum Cleaner 1 and Vacuum Cleaner 2. After that, the territory finally ushered in a period of peace. The number of goblins and kobold tribes in the territory decreased because of the barbarians' regular patrols. Su Len continued to bring the slaves to reclaim the land in the camp to plant potatoes. There was still a shortage of food in the territory. Su Len's plan was to cultivate at least 5,000 mu of land, all of which would be planted with potatoes. The potatoes would mature in 3 to 4 months. When the first batch of potatoes was ripe, it would almost snow here. Unlike the south, the north had long winters. Only when the potatoes matured would there be enough food in the territory. Chapter 39. The weather was still hot after autumn. In the wilderness outside the territory, thousands of goblins, kobolds, and gnolls were repairing the earth under the sun. There were also dozens of supervisors of different races standing next to them. Whenever they saw someone slacking off, they would immediately whip them. Su Len was lying leisurely on a recliner under a big tree, wearing a pair of black crystal sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. There was a glass of freshly squeezed juice on the small table next to him. Behind him, Vacuum Cleaner number 1 and Vacuum Cleaner number 2 were like 2 small fans with great power, blowing the wind with a whooshing sound. In this autumn sun, they brought a gust of cool breeze. On the other side of the field that had already been cultivated, a group of strong women and children were driving the cows to plow the field. On the other side of the city wall, there was fertile black soil on the banks of the Red Sand River. About 2,000 acres of land had already been cultivated. According to the current progress, it would take at most half a month to cultivate all 5,000 acres of potatoes. Ding! The construction of the barracks field is complete. Importing data. Importing the militia training content. Importing the infantry training content. Importing the archer training content. Data importing progress 10%, 20%, 30%. Su Len was slightly taken aback by the sudden sound of the system notification. The barracks field was already completed? Su Len quickly opened the system interface to check. Barracks Drill Ground. The barracks drill ground trains qualified soldiers for the territory. Every soldier trained here is a qualified warrior. They are important personnel in the defense of the territory and have undergone rigorous military training. They only need to go through a period of training to become elite soldiers. Soldiers are the foundation of a lord's rule. Weapon proficiency +2, training time reduced by 20%, discipline +2, morale +15, territory stability +15. Looking at the barracks attributes, Su Len was secretly happy. With the barracks, he could continue to train qualified soldiers. Of course, the prerequisite was that he had enough money and territory. Training soldiers required money. Currently, the barracks in the territory could only train 3 types of soldiers. One was the barbarian soldiers, the other was the spearman, and the last was the archer. Among them, the lancers were the least expensive, with only 1 kinnar. The barbarians required 3 kinnar, and the archers required 2 kinnar. As for cavalry, crossbowmen, and heavy infantry, they were all unlocked. The easiest way to unlock these troop classes was to obtain the corresponding troop class's commander's seal. If there was no commander's seal, then recruit a hero who could train this troop class. Of course, they could only recruit ordinary soldiers. As for those special soldiers, they needed a commander's seal to train them. Su Len also wanted to form a powerful knight order, but based on the current situation, this goal was still very far away. They arrived at the military camp, which was located on the west side of the territory outside the city wall. The city wall that Su Len was currently building was actually the inner city of the city. When the territory population increased next year, the outer city and outer city walls would be officially built. The inner city of Su Len was prepared to be his private land. The area of the military camp was not small. It was divided into barracks, warehouses, training grounds, and drill grounds. The training grounds and drill grounds took up 70% of the total area of the military camp. Currently, there were only some archery targets and straw dummies in the training grounds. There were also some training weapons and equipment. An army formed by newly recruited freedmen would not be recognized by the system. Only those who were strong would be recognized, such as the barbarians. When freedmen formed an army, they would still be considered commoners, and only after a period of training could they become militia. But once they had a military camp and went through the training, they would directly skip the militia and become new soldiers. Although the military camp was successfully built, Su Len did not recruit soldiers. The territory's population was too small. Other than the barbarians, there were only mercenaries. If he wanted to train soldiers, he would have to wait for the slaves that Xian brought back from Cult City. After inspecting the military camp, Su Len did not go back to rest. Instead, he went to the smithy. In the last battle with the Storm Tiger, his weapon was damaged. Now, he needed a new one. Because he was very strong, his weapon had to be sturdy and durable. Take the spear for example. A spear made of ironwood was too light in his hands. Therefore, he used an iron spear. However, even an iron spear could not withstand his destruction. As for why he did not use other weapons, it was because the spear was cool. Actually, it was because of the system's template. Only by using a spear could he unleash the greatest power. As for the luck of the spearman, Su Len did not feel it at all. In fact, his luck was not bad. After all, he had inherited Big Brother Yun's template. How did the saying go again? The world's spearman had a stone of luck. Zilong alone had 12 stones, while the rest of the spearmen had 2 stones. Su Len now had 12 stones of luck. The spearman's luck was based on facts. Looking through historical records and classical works, he realized that most of the spearmen in history did not have good endings. The Marquis of Huayin, Han Xian, was conferred the title of Marquis. He received an imperial edict but was ignored by heaven and earth. In the end, he was beaten to death. The little conqueror, Sun Tzu, was ambushed by a few thieves. He was seriously injured and died of an illness. In the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, he was cursed to death by the demon Yuji. The 5-tiger general, Ma Chao, died of an illness in his prime. The 5-tiger general, Zhang Fei, was stabbed in the back by his subordinates. His head was chopped off while he was sleeping. In the Romance of the Sui and Tang dynasties, Luo Qing fell into a trap and was pierced through the heart by thousands of arrows. The Yang family of Skywave Prefecture, the Yang family's spearmanship was unparalleled in the world. However, almost no one in the family had a good ending. The leopard head, Lin Chong, was exhausted and his wife and children were separated. In the end, he died of humiliation in the Six Harmonies Pagoda. Su Ning, the leader of the first group of people to worship heaven on the way to Liangshan Lake. The national hero, Yu Fei, was killed by Wan Yengo and Qin Hui. These living examples told us that the spearman's luck was really low. Looking at Zhao Zilong, who had fought countless battles in his life and lived for more than 80 years without any illness or disaster, his ending was much better than theirs. It was a miracle that he could save his master alone. 42 years of life, Zilong has shown his prowess. Therefore, Big Brother Yun's luck was based on history. If he wanted to forge a weapon for himself, he naturally had to use the best materials possible. The best material in the blacksmith's shop was the tempered iron essence. In addition to the tempered iron essence, Su Len also took out the 2 pieces of iron essence that were rewarded by the system. These 2 pieces of iron essence were much better than the tempered iron essence in the blacksmith's shop. If not for the fact that he did not have enough iron essence to forge a spear, Su Len would have used all of it. Now, he could only use a mixture of tempered iron essence. Chapter 40. Bruce's craftsmanship could only be considered decent. There was still a gap between him and a true master, not to mention the dwarves. However, Su Len didn't expect him to make a divine weapon for him. He only wanted it to be sturdy and durable. None of the enemies he'd encountered so far had made him feel threatened. After a day of forging, Sullen's new weapon was completed. Steel Spear, a superior weapon forged with steel as the main material. Sturdy, durable, and sharp. Armor penetration +1, sturdiness +1, sharpness +1. Su Len shook the spear. The entire spear was made of metal, so it weighed more than 40 kilograms. It was already considered a heavy weapon, and it was more than 3 meters long. Without great strength, it was impossible to wield this weapon. After the rain, the wilderness plains welcomed the bright and beautiful sun. A group of spotted antelopes were eating grass with their heads lowered. Only the leader of the antelope kept turning its head back and forth, paying attention to any movement in the wind or grass. It seemed that it would immediately warn the herd to flee if it noticed anything wrong. Su Len stood downwind and observed the group of antelopes. Antelopes were very alert animals. There would always be a sentinel keeping watch at all times. This was also how they could reproduce and survive in the wilderness. Antelopes usually lived in groups of a dozen to a few dozen. These antelopes were good at running and were very difficult to catch. At the very least, horses and hunting dogs couldn't catch up to them. Goblins and kobolds couldn't even catch up. The best way to catch an antelope was to ambush and surround it. At this moment, 30 barbarians had formed an encirclement around the group of antelopes within a 1-kilometer radius. Before the group of antelopes noticed, the encirclement started to shrink. The antelopes didn't notice the approaching danger and continued to nibble on the grass. A few 3-month-old baby antelopes were playing around their mother. At this moment, the sentinel's head suddenly stopped moving. Its body seemed to be preparing to leap up. The barbarians hiding in the grass felt their hearts tighten. Move! With a loud roar, he leapt up from the bushes. The barbarians hidden in the bushes around him leapt out and quickly charged towards the antelope in the middle. The herd of spotted antelopes instantly panicked. More than 10 spotted antelopes ran in all directions in panic, but against the hunter who had already completed his task, their fate was self-evident. A few minutes later, more than 30 barbarians came to Su Luan's place with their prey in high spirits. "Boss, we caught them all. Not a single one escaped. Are the females and lambs injured?" Su Len asked. He planned to try to raise the spotted antelopes in his territory. "Boss, since you've instructed us, we'll definitely be careful. Those you and the little spotted antelope are fine." A barbarian raised the spotted antelope in his hand and said, "That's good, let's go back to Sword's Gate and eat a whole roasted lamb today," Su Len said as he led the barbarians back to the campsite. Next was boiling water, slaughtering the antelope, letting out the blood and skinning it. Sulen purposely kept the blood for tonight's hot pot. A few barbarians deftly cut open the antelope's stomach and cut it into pieces. They didn't throw away the organs either. These were the real treasures. After washing and skinning them clean, they directly put them into the hot pot to cook. Sulen purposely asked Bruce to melt the bronze weapons and make 2 bronze hot pots. He hadn't had a hot pot for so long in the wilderness. Now that the territory had stabilized, Sulen couldn't hold back his hunger any longer. The soup base of the hot pot was boiled with butter, chili pepper, and other spices. The soup stock was also boiled with beef bones. Although the conditions were a little simple, the soup boiled with bison bones was too fragrant. The beef bones had been simmered for a day, and the oil and the bone marrow had been stewed out. Sulen ate the mutton hot pot to his heart's content. After coming to the northern wilderness for so long, he ate potato fish or potato fried fish every day. No matter how delicious the fish soup was, he would throw up if he ate it for 1 or 2 months. He almost wanted to look up at the stars. Now that he had a delicious mutton hot pot, it was simply too blissful. Because of the food shortage, Sulen took the barbarians to hunt in the wilderness. Although the wilderness looked barren, there were still many different kinds of animals. After a period of hunting, the hunting team's harvest was very rich. In order to store the prey, Sulen specially ordered the slaves to build a livestock pen next to the city wall. Now there were more than 100 different kinds of animals in the pen. There were more than 20 spotted antelopes, and the most were the giant antelopes. These giant antelopes migrated from here some time ago, and he and the barbarian hunters caught hundreds of them. If it wasn't because he was worried that the giant antelopes wouldn't pass through here in the future, Sulen was ready to cook them with a ladle. The construction of the territory was still ongoing, but the most important buildings had already been completed. Most of them were civilian houses. The houses he was building this time could house up to 1,000 people. Even the 500 slaves that Zion and Johnson brought back would have a place to live. However, Sulen's own lord's castle was now almost finished. Of course, it was simplified. If it was built according to his ideal, it wouldn't be finished at all in a year and a half. As for the temple in the territory, Sulen didn't build it at all. Temples were necessary in the St. Louis Empire. Every city had a temple, and even the villages had a church. After all, the church was an international power, and the power of the church was unprecedentedly strong there. The Kingdom of Florence was a multi-faith country. There were temples in the cities, but the power of religion was not strong. Even if Sulen built a temple in this godforsaken territory, there probably wouldn't be any priests here. A temple had its advantages. At least the healing divinity of a temple priest was very good. And from the beginning, he didn't plan to build a temple. It was too expensive. The best material to build a temple was marble, but where could he find marble in the northern wilderness? A temple occupied a large area, and was generally built in the prosperous areas of the city. In such a place where every inch of land was worth gold, Sulen didn't want to give it to a temple for free. Wouldn't it be better to build a business street or sell it as a shop? Of course, if his territory developed, there would definitely be churches coming to build temples. At that time, it would depend on the negotiation between the two sides. After the important buildings in the territory were finished, Sulen directed the construction of drainage projects in the town, including the public toilets and public baths in the future town. Chapter 41. In the past, the barbarians did not pay attention to personal hygiene. Later, Sulen forced them to do so. Barbarians usually had long hair, and some of them even had braids. However, these guys were too lazy and couldn't be bothered to take care of their hair. Therefore, their hair was often dirty, and there were even many lice in it. The smell on their bodies was also suffocating. Sulen ordered the goblin slaves to dig a large hole and sprinkled lime in it. He then directed the water from the Red Sand River into the hole, and personally threw all the barbarians into it. They were not allowed to come out until they were soaked in it for half an hour. After a series of forced measures, Sulen finally taught the barbarians how to be hygienic. Many of the barbarians were too lazy to take care of their hair, and they were afraid that Su Len would teach them a lesson. In the end, they shaved all their hair. As a result, except for the female barbarians in the camp, 8 out of 10 male barbarians were bald. All the barbarian warriors were bald. Now, his barbarian guards were all bald and muscular. They looked very intimidating. During the hunt, the barbarian hunters accidentally caught a few wild horses. Su Len tried to train the wild horses, but these wild horses were difficult to train. Su Len did not have a qualified trainer. Some of the mercenaries knew how to ride horses, but they were not very good at it. Su Len did not want to give up on the cavalry, but he did not have any suitable candidates. In the end, he could only build a stable for the wild horses to live in. Perhaps in the coming year, there would be a few more foals in the stable. Because of the archer's seal, Su Len could train the archers. The shooting range in the camp had also been built. At the moment, the territory needed a group of archers to increase their long-range damage. Aside from the factor of the archer, the factor of the weapon also accounted for a large proportion. It was not easy to make a good bow. From the selection of materials to the production process, it was very complicated. There were also many materials. For example, the bow body of the bow needed to be selected from the best wood. Even the production process had to be adapted to the seasons. The wood was dissected in the winter, the horn was boiled in the spring, and the tendon was treated in the summer. In the autumn, the wood, horn, and tendon were combined with glue, lacquer, and silk. Finally, the body of the bow was fixed in the coldest season of winter. Therefore, it would take at least 2 years to make a good bow. Su Len couldn't wait that long, so he decided to make some bows and arrows first. After a while, he would see if there was a chance to trade for some centaur longbows with the centaur tribe. Due to the short amount of time, the bows and arrows made by the blacksmith's shop had a smaller range and power. However, it could also be used for training purposes. The archers were selected from the mercenaries. Although the strength of these mercenaries was average, they had used all kinds of weapons. Su Len gave them the shooting range in the barracks for practice. There was a lot of red sand in the Red Sand River, which was why Su Len named the river. The sand was very fine, and it was very useful for laying a training ground. The barbarians were all energetic guys. When they didn't have a mission, they would often spar and wrestle. After the construction of the barracks training ground was completed, these barbarians were happy. They liked to fight on the training ground when they had nothing to do. Now, the training ground was almost turned into a gladiator arena. Because the territory lacked entertainment facilities, the barbarian gladiators were very popular in the camp. Su Len let them be. Most of the trees in the northern wastelands were pine wood. Pine wood was not the best wood for making bows and arrows because of its average toughness. The Kingdom of Florence most commonly used oak or teak to make bows and arrows. After these woods were air-dried, the bows made were tough and not easily deformed. The range was also long. It was the standard equipment of the kingdom's army. Of course, although the Kingdom of Florence's bows and arrows were good, they were still lacking compared to the centaurs and half-elves. The effective range of the Florence's standard longbow was only about 100 meters. Some excellent archers could hit the target at 120 meters. The effective range of the centaur's bows and arrows was 150 meters or even 200 meters. The same was true for the half-elves. In addition to their superior bow-making skills, there was also the material of the bows and arrows. The centaur's longbows were made of purple fir wood, coupled with their unique bow-making skills. As for the bows used by the half-elves, it seemed to be a special plant that they cultivated. Purple fir wood was expensive and could only be found in the depths of the northern wastelands. The wood was tough, elastic, and malleable. The amount of purple fir wood that the Kingdom of Florence obtained every year was very small. Most of it was obtained from the centaur tribe. It was not easy for Su Len to obtain this kind of wood unless he also crossed the wilderness and went further north to look for it. It was not that humans had never thought of transplanting purple fir wood. With the help of the wizards, humans successfully transplanted and grew a batch of yew trees. However, after transplanting to the human kingdom, the quality of the purple fir wood declined greatly. Compared to the purple fir wood of the centaurs, the wood was 1/3 softer. It was not even comparable to oak or teak. The cost was higher than teak and oak, but the quality was almost the same. As a result, the purple fir wood was quickly forgotten in the corner. Sulan wanted to develop archers, so it was necessary to find a suitable wood. As for oak and teak, these trees liked warmer climates. His territory was too far north. Whether it was oak or teak, they would freeze to death in the long northern winter. Of course, if Sulan had enough money, he could also buy it directly from the system store. Since the establishment of the blacksmith shop, the system store sold a variety of weapons, but the weapons in the store were too expensive. A barbarian two-handed axe cost 150 kinnar. He asked the blacksmith shop to make one for him, and the cost was only 20 kinnar. A short bow cost 40 kinnar, and a long bow directly cost 100 kinnar. Sulan was now so poor that he could not get 100 kinnar. It could be said that he was now the poorest lord in the whole kingdom of Florence. Naturally, Sulan could not afford such a price. Although there were many things in the territory, it still made him very happy to see the territory change day by day. Just this afternoon, Zion and Johnson returned to the territory with more than 500 slaves and 20 carts of food. The return of the caravan instantly multiplied the population of Sulan's territory. A sufficient population was the foundation of a territory's development. Now the number of humans in Sulan's territory had reached more than 700. Although the population was still small, as long as they survived this difficult period, the territory would develop rapidly. Chapter 42. With the addition of 500 human slaves, Sulan's manpower was no longer as tight. All 500 slaves were sent to farm. This time, Sulan did not plan to only farm 500 acres of land. He wanted to farm as much land as possible. With the return of the caravan, the camp became livelier. The 20 carriages also brought back a lot of supplies. After all, furs were very popular in the northern wilderness. With the return of the caravan, Sulan temporarily put aside looking for suitable materials to make bows and arrows. He focused on developing his territory again. With a large increase in the population, the territory became more prosperous. 10 days after Owen's caravan left, they passed by Sulan's territory again. However, because of the barbarians' escape last time, Owen directly went to Sulan to ask for compensation. However, Sulan did not admit that he was the one who let the barbarians escape. He even claimed that the barbarians who escaped were not with him. In order to prove his innocence, Sulan asked Owen to personally check his barbarian guards. Of course, he did not find anything. In the end, Owen could only leave with a sullen expression. Sulan noticed that Owen's caravan had many longbows. The longbows were 1.8 meters long and had a purple body. They were centaur longbows. There were at least 50 of them. It seemed that Owen had a good harvest this time. These centaur longbows could be sold for at least 3,000 gold coins in the human kingdom. They were also priceless. They would be bought as soon as they appeared. An archer squad made up of centaur longbows was definitely the nightmare of any attacker. Unfortunately, he did not have the money to buy them. Sulan suppressed his desire to rob with an unusually strong will. He arranged for people to send Owen's caravan away. As the days passed, the territory continued to change. The appearance of a new territory would naturally occupy the living space of the original wasteland races. It was also a threat to the surrounding wasteland races. After defeating the middle-sized Knoll tribe, the territory gained a temporary peace. However, this peace would not last long. The strong intervention of humans was like a baby crocodile in a small fish pond. Although it was still young, once this crocodile grew up, the whole fish pond would be eaten clean by it. Faced with the pressure of the humans, and after a month of chaos, the surrounding tribes finally came to an agreement. They formed a powerful army to drive the humans out of the wastelands. The remaining 2 Knoll tribes, as well as a larger number of goblins and kobolds, were preparing to form a powerful allied army. The law of survival in the wilderness was always the law of the jungle. It was rare for several tribes to band together. Only when they felt a common sense of danger would they choose to band together. After the last battle, Sulen restored the beacon towers in his territory and added a few more. He also paid close attention to the movements around his territory. Forer was a goblin. To be precise, he was the leader of a small goblin tribe. When Sulen led the barbarians to clean up the wasteland, their entire tribe was captured and enslaved. What was unbelievable was that the leader of the goblin tribe, Forer, had learned the human language. Although he stuttered and spoke with a strange accent, he had successfully learned the human language. After learning the human language, Forer volunteered to be Sulen's interpreter. He believed that there was nothing wrong with being Sulen's slave. At least Sulen would give them food so that they would not starve. The goblins in the wasteland were often enslaved by various powerful tribes. The trolls, gnolls, lizard men, and many others would enslave the goblins. Under the enslavement of these tribes, the goblins were used as cannon fodder or as food reserves. In comparison, being a slave in the human territory was like heaven. Although they would still be whipped, at least they would not be killed. Moreover, they would be given food if they worked hard. Although the food given to them was pitiful, it was better than starving. Although Sulen had been in this world for 10 years, he still retained many values from his previous life. Of course, he did not try to challenge the traditions of this world. He was against slavery, against the exploitation of nobles, against religious oppression, and so on. As an adult with vested interests, he would not risk universal condemnation to liberate the slaves. However, he would not be like the people of this era who would oppress the slaves cruelly. For example, as long as the goblins and houndhead men did not resist, Sulen would not simply kill them. The slaves would work and provide them with food. Of course, that was all. However, the goblin leader, Forer, felt that this was a blessing. The goblin leader told the other goblins about the benefits of being Sulen's slave and promoted Sulen's benevolence. What surprised him more was that the system recognized this goblin called Forer. Goblin slave, Forer, goblin leader. Master, Sulen, loyalty, 100. Most of the former goblin lords were foolish, but there were always one or two exceptions. As a smart one among the goblins, he learned the human language with his own efforts. In order to have enough food and clothes, he chose to pledge his loyalty to the humans. With his identity, he easily gained the trust of the goblins. Skills, observation +2, goblin affinity +20. With this goblin slave, the goblin slaves became more docile. Sulen put all the goblin supervisors under his command and the goblins' efficiency increased again. And those goblin supervisors had actually become soldiers recognized by the system. Goblin supervisor, the strongest among the goblins. In order to have a better life, these goblins chose to pledge their loyalty to the human lord. Strength, 4, vitality, 3, agility, 5, spirit, 3, charm, 3, skills, lash, observation. Although their combat power is not as good as the 5 weaklings, they still have their own uses. After Sulen discovered this situation, other than ordering the goblins to work, he also sent them to the wilderness to gather information about the tribes. Due to their identity as goblins, they naturally gained the recognition of the tribes in the wilderness. They easily blended into the tribes and eavesdropped on the news for Sulen. For these undisciplined tribes in the wilderness, one more goblin slave or one less goblin slave would not even be noticed. With the information provided by the goblin slaves, Sulen finally had a more accurate understanding of the tribes around his territory. Chapter 43. You're saying that the tribes have formed an alliance to attack my territory? Sulen was not too surprised to hear the news from Forer. Yes, master, Forer said respectfully as he lay on the ground. Get up. If it's true, you've done a great job. Sulen put the piece of wood on the table. Thank you, master. Forer said excitedly. He even wanted to kiss Sulen's boots. Johnson, send a few people to scout the territory. See if the gnolls, goblins, and kobolds have gathered. Yes, boss. I'll go arrange it right away, Johnson said as he turned around and left. After the arrangements were made, Sulen began to gather the rest of the barbarian guards. Everyone's vacation was cancelled. Sulen even gave the remaining women and children weapons. Although the women and children were women and children, they were not weak at all. If it weren't for the childish look on their faces, it wouldn't be a problem to call them adults. As barbarians, even though they were still underage, their physiques were no weaker than the average Florentine citizen. They might even be stronger. Sulen did not plan to let the women and children fight. He gave them weapons so that they could maintain order and defend the city. Sulen did not plan to passively defend. This territory had just been developed. If the gnolls, kobolds, and goblins were allowed to attack, the newly developed farmlands outside the territory would be destroyed. The blacksmith shop by the river would also be destroyed. This was unacceptable to Sulen. He had invested thousands of kinnar and spent so much time on it. If it was destroyed, he would go crazy. The blacksmith shop had made many weapons recently. After the scrap metal was melted down and recast, it had become refined iron. The quality of the weapons made with the refined iron was excellent. There was a half-body armor, a two-handed axe, a horn helmet, a pair of boots, a skirt armor, and 3 hand axes. This was the standard equipment of the barbarian guards. If one were to buy it in Kalt, it would cost at least 300 kinnar. The most expensive one was the half-body armor. It was made of refined iron and cost at least 150 kinnar. This set of equipment weighed at least 100 pounds. Normal people would find it difficult to walk with it, but the barbarians could still walk as if they were flying. It was as if they were wearing leather armor instead of iron. Over 30 barbarian warriors in metal armor and holding sharp axes stood together. Even the weakest of them was over 2 meters tall, and an invisible aura of killing intent washed over them. A timid person would probably be scared to death by these war machines. Other than these barbarian guards, Sulen had only prepared some axes and spears. Their armor was also some leather armor, and at most, only metal plates were embedded in their vital parts. There were not many leather armors, and most of them were replaced by barbarian guards. Although the mercenaries had joined the territory as free citizens, they would still pick up their weapons when the territory was in danger. They were considered veterans. Although their strength was average, they were still capable of staying behind to guard the territory. The 500 serfs all retreated to the city to hide. Sulen had spent 1,500 kinnar to buy these serfs. They were to be used as farmers in the territory. He did not plan to let these serfs fight. Even if they picked up their weapons, they would be nothing more than food to the goblins and kobolds. The 1,000 goblins, kobolds, and gnolls were locked up to prevent them from causing trouble when Sulen was not around. After everything was arranged, it was already evening. Sulen brought the barbarian guards back to the Lord's castle for dinner. When Zion and Johnson went back to buy slaves last time, Sulen specifically asked him to bring back a chef from Kalt. After a few days of training by Sulen, this chef could now cook food that suited his taste. Johnson took a bite of the wheat flour pancake. The wheat flour used to make white bread was baked into a pancake, and he rolled it up with a roll of roast duck meat. It conquered his taste buds instantly, and he devoured the pancake in a few bites. "Boss, this roast duck roll is amazing." Sulen did not pay attention to this glutton. He picked up a piece of boiled mutton with his chopsticks and ate happily. "Did the scouts come back?" "They're back." Johnson ate the rest of the roll in one bite. "What's the situation like?" Sulen saw Johnson eating so happily, and couldn't help but grab a roll and roll some roast duck. He rolled it up and took a big bite. "Those tribes are still fighting for dominance." Johnson sneered. "Those tribes in the wilderness are all bandits. It's not easy to get them to listen to you. None of them are willing to suffer losses. If they want to unite, they won't succeed without a few internal fights. They really are a bunch of mobs." Sulen said. "How many of them are there?" "The camp is too messy. I can't calculate how many of them there are, but I estimate at least 5,000. Johnson picked up another roll and took a bite. 5,000? These trash are looking down on us too much. Do they really think they can win with numbers? Sulen laughed disdainfully. But we can't be careless. A lion will go all out to catch a rabbit, not to mention a war. Be careful. My lord is wise. Johnson flattered. It's good that they're working together. It saves me the trouble of looking for them one by one. This time, we can deal with them all at once. It saves me a lot of trouble. Sulen said as he took a sip of ale. By the way, do you remember where the tribe's allied forces are? Of course. I asked Forer to bring 2 goblins to keep an eye on them. That's good. Sulen nodded and continued eating. Let's go after dinner. After dinner, Sulen left the camp with his barbarian guards under the cover of the night. It was still cold in the wilderness at night. Sulen tightened his clothes. Those damn tribes in the wilderness. They should have just stayed put. Why did they have to come looking for trouble? Now I have to travel in the middle of the night. Sulen was in a bad mood. As a noble with a territory, he couldn't sleep on a thick velvet bed at night. There were no pretty maids to warm his bed, and he had to travel with a group of rough men. He was in a bad mood. There was no velvet bed, no pretty maids to warm his bed. There were only 35 muscular bald men who were more than 2 meters tall. Warm his bed? Unless you wanted to have a taste of being covered by them. Chapter 44. Under the starlight in the sky, the group hurried through the wilderness. The camp of the tribes was to the east of Sulen's territory. It was more than 80 miles away from Sulen's camp. According to the Knoll's speed, it would take them 2 days to arrive if they attacked Sulen's territory. However, for the barbarians and Sulen, they could arrive in 3 hours if they traveled with light equipment. To save energy, Sulen brought a few carriages to transport the armor. Everyone carried their own weapons. Other than weapons, the carriages were also loaded with large amounts of pine wood. Pine wood could be found everywhere in the wilderness. This plant liked to grow in cold areas because of the high oil content in its trunk. It was very suitable for making torches. It was a must-have for traveling, killing, and robbing. There were many nocturnal animals in the wilderness. However, when they saw Sulen's group, they all ran away. The group traveled for 6 hours in the wilderness. Finally, at 2:00 in the morning, they arrived 3 miles away from the camp of the tribes. Master, you're finally here. A figure quickly rushed over and jumped at Sulen's feet. It was Forer. Get up. What's the situation at the camp of the tribes? Sulen asked. Master, there was a disturbance at the camp in the evening. The gnolls from 2 tribes were fighting for food. What's the situation now? They're resting in the camp. Sulen nodded. It was 2:00 in the morning. People were sleeping soundly. He let the barbarian guards rest here while he and Forer sneaked toward the camp of the tribes. Sulen hid in a tree outside the encampment and secretly observed. The encampment of the allied forces of tribes was very simple and messy. It could even be said that the encampment set up by a rookie was better than this one. What made Sulen even more speechless was that no one was keeping watch at night in such a big camp. No, the goblins and kobolds who were keeping watch were already asleep. Sulen could still hear the snoring of the goblin from more than 10 meters away. After observing outside the camp for half an hour, Sulen left with Forer and returned to their temporary stronghold. After a long night's journey, as the most elite barbarian guards, they had recovered. Everyone, put on your equipment. The battle is about to begin. Sulen said as he took out a spear from his storage space. The 35 barbarian warriors immediately got into action, donning their armor. In less than 5 minutes, everyone was ready to go. The barbarian warriors in full armor began their slaughter. Boss, I'm ready. Give me the order. Johnson said eagerly as he stroked the shiny blade of his axe. Flames danced in his eyes. That's right, boss. We can't wait any longer. My axe is thirsty for blood. This time, I must kill to my heart's content. The barbarian warriors all asked to fight. What's the hurry? Sulen slapped Johnson to the side. There are only 36 of us. There are at least 5,000 kobolds, goblins, gnolls, and trolls in the camp. If we charge in like this, how many can you kill? You won't even be able to kill all of them. Use your brains. Boss, are we going to run after one kill? Johnson asked carefully. Idiot. Sulen looked at him and said, Do you see those torches? Take a few each. After we enter, don't fight. Use the torches to light up the entire camp. Understood, boss. Take the things. We're going to start now. Sulen looked at the huge camp a few kilometers away. The barbecue party has begun. I hope you like it. It was very quiet in the wilderness at night. Occasionally, there would be the sound of the northern wind whistling. The temperature was very low at night. Even the goblins and kobolds on night watch had hidden in a corner to sleep. At this moment, a rustling sound came from the dark bushes outside the camp. Soon, black figures emerged from the darkness one after another. These black figures were over 2 meters tall and wore heavy armor. The giant axes in their hands gleamed coldly. They were all silent, like a group of demons that had crawled out from the abyss. Light the torches and charge with me. The torches made of pine wood were very easy to burn. After a few seconds, a ball of orange flame suddenly rose from the top of the candle. As it burned, it made crackling sounds. The air was filled with the smell of pine. All 36 torches were lit. Then, Sulen gave the order and led the barbarian guards to form a conical formation and charge toward the camp. Wearing weapons and equipment that weighed hundreds of pounds, the 30-odd barbarians ran with an aura that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The heavy footsteps woke up the goblins and kobolds on night watch. After discovering the enemy, these cannon fodder shouted and wanted to escape, but it was already too late. These tribes in the wilderness did not expect Sulen to sneak in and attack at night. The defense of the camp was also arranged casually by the unlucky ones. In the end, the relaxed camp was easily breached. Sulen rushed to the gate of the camp and waved the long spear in his hand. He smashed the gate of the camp into pieces. The 30-odd barbarians followed closely behind. Everywhere they went, there were corpses everywhere. According to Sulen's orders, the group did not fight with these monsters. After charging into the camp, the barbarians started to set fire crazily. The camp of the allied tribes quickly turned into a sea of fire. The construction of the camp was very simple and messy. More and more flames started to burn. The tents were covered with a lot of oil because they were waterproof. A few small flames would ignite the entire tent. In addition, the allied tribes did not clean up the weeds in the camp, so the sparks easily ignited the withered grass. Soon, the fire grew bigger and bigger. Faced with this situation, many goblins and kobolds began to run in all directions. Their escape led more goblins and kobolds to follow. These tribes in the wilderness were already problematic in the first place. After the chaos, the leaders of the tribes could not control their own armies. Some gnolls wanted to gather together, but the barbarian warriors took out their axes and threw them, splitting their heads in half. As for the monsters that did not resist, they did not kill them. Instead, they chased them from behind and let them run in all directions to create chaos. Those that dared to resist were all killed in the shortest amount of time. This was to give these tribes the greatest fear. If they ran, they had a chance to live. If they resisted, they would die. Originally, the army of these tribes was undisciplined, a motley crew. After the sudden night attack, they became even more disorderly. Chapter 45. The night was filled with flames and the sounds of fighting. The tribes had no idea how many enemies there were. Some took advantage of the chaos to retaliate. Although the tribes had formed an alliance, it didn't mean that they were harmonious. On the contrary, there was a lot of discord between the tribes. Taking advantage of the chaos, they directly attacked their old enemies. For a time, the camp was in chaos. The sounds of fighting were everywhere. Sulen and the barbarian warriors formed a cone formation that was like a sharp blade, stirring up the entire camp. As soon as the tribes showed signs of gathering, Sulen would directly disperse and kill them. Faced with such a situation, the goblins and kobolds, who could only fight with the wind, had already started to run. The goblins, on the other hand, were still trying to gather together and counterattack. But as soon as they gathered, they were crushed by Sulen and the barbarian warriors before they could even form a formation. The fully equipped barbarian guards were like high-speed heavy tanks, breaking through all the obstacles in front of them. The sharp two-handed axes were constantly swinging, one after another. The barbarians were like highly efficient harvesters, cutting rows of enemies in half. The fully equipped barbarian guards carried more than 100 pounds of weight. As they charged, they were completely invincible. The equipment that could crush ordinary people didn't seem cumbersome at all. No matter if it was the goblins or the gnolls, everyone was equal in front of the giant axes. This group of barbarian warriors with horned helmets were like demons walking out of hell. Blood soaked their armor, leaving a path of flesh and blood behind them. Although Sulen and the others charged quickly, the camp of the allied tribes was too big. A team of 36 people was still too small. Although Sulen was charging on the battlefield as fast as he could, there were still some gnolls and goblins who managed to gather together. The heavy spear in Sulen's hand flew up and down. The shrill sound of the spear breaking through the air could be heard even in the chaotic battlefield. Rows of enemies were directly swept away. Those broken bodies were obviously not going to survive. Just as he kept moving forward, he suddenly felt the weight on the spear suddenly decrease. He turned around and saw that there were no enemies standing around. In front of him, there was a vacuum in the chaotic battlefield. Across the empty space, a majestic gnoll more than 2.5 meters tall was fiercely staring at him. This gnoll was holding a flail. The handle of the flail was about 1/2 meter long. On the other end of the chain was a 1/2 meter long chain. The other end of the chain was connected to an iron ball the size of a human head. The iron ball was covered with sharp spikes. At this time, it was full of red flesh and blood. At first glance, it was frightening. Unlike the other gnolls, this gnoll was wearing a set of fine iron armor. There were hundreds of gnolls around him. Similarly, these gnolls were also wearing armor. The gnoll's armor looked simple and cumbersome. Most of the armor was made up of individual parts, such as spiked pauldrons, heavy breastplates, and rough and cumbersome wrist guards. These pieces of equipment were obviously cast. Although they looked ugly, it did not affect their use. The gnolls had mastered the casting process, but there was no way to forge complete armor. They could only use simple smelting methods. There were a dozen ragged corpses around this group of gnolls. Unsurprisingly, this group of gnolls had killed them with the flail. After seeing Sulen and the others, the gnoll leader let out a roar to the sky. The sound even covered the noisy battlefield. Human. The tall gnoll's eyes were blood red. It looked at Sulen with a murderous gaze. The heavy flail in its hand swung, and the iron ball scraped the air. The sharp sound of the flail breaking through the air was frightening. There was no doubt about the power of the flail when it was swung. Standing in front of you is the demon of the abyss, the king of gnolls, the master of the realm of Yeenagu, the descendant of the powerful demon Lord Yeenagu. Hog the Skull Crusher. Damn humans, how dare you invade the territory protected by the great king of gnolls. I will smash all your heads and sacrifice them to the king of gnolls. A powerful sacrifice will definitely make the king of gnolls give me more power. Are you done? Sulen's wrist trembled slightly, and the fine steel spear shook slightly. The blood on the spear instantly slid down, revealing the still bright body of the spear. These may be the last words of your life. Please cherish them. Sulen spun the spear and held it upright. Arcs of electricity jumped and flashed around his body. Soon, more and more electricity gathered on his body and weapon. He stood at the front of the cone-shaped formation, like the god of thunder in the myths. The barbarians behind him were in high morale, and they looked at Su Len with worship. Knoll warriors, pick up your weapons, smash their heads, and sacrifice them to the gods. Cranium Crusher Hog let out an angry roar. A strange power spread out from his body and quickly enveloped the gnolls around him. Divine art, bloodthirsty rage. The eyes of the hundreds of jack-o'-lanterns were instantly bloodshot, and their bodies swelled like balloons. The blood vessels in their bodies also swelled up one by one. Their rapid breathing made them even more restless, and cracks appeared on their armor, which was originally quite fitting. The leader of the gnolls laughed grimly, then waved the flail at Su Len, and then rushed over with a howl. Thunder Spear. Su Luen's clear voice penetrated the whole battlefield. A large amount of thunder and lightning burst out from his body, accompanied by the crackling sound of bones. His body directly soared to 2 meters, and streaks of lightning constantly jumped around his body. Seeing the gnolls charging at him, Su Len did not show any signs of weakness. He directly met them, waving the spear in his hand, and the gnolls in front of him flew back at an even faster speed. Almost all of the gnolls were killed in one hit. Their bones were broken, and the surface of their bodies was scorched black by the electricity. In the blink of an eye, 7 or 8 gnolls were dead. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and fire burst forth. Su Len was like a bulldozer, pushing forward without stopping. The gnolls could not stop him at all, and they did not even slow down Su Len. Whirling Cherry. For Gang Cheese appeared as the spear rotated. The Gang Cheese mixed with lightning and instantly exploded in all directions. The Gang Cheese and lightning were like countless sharp swords. The surrounding jack-o'-lanterns were paralyzed by the lightning and then penetrated by the Gang Cheese. The jack-o'-lanterns' bodies were cut into pieces and turned into charcoal. A vacuum area with a radius of 4 meters was cleared out around Su Len. Chapter 46. The huge casualties did not make the gnolls afraid. After being buffed by bloodthirsty rage, their rationality had been reduced to the lowest point. They had no fear at all and continued to charge towards Su Len. Facing the frenzied gnolls, the barbarian guards had no intention of retreating. The barbarian guards had already killed countless gnolls. Seeing the gnolls provoking them, Johnson roared angrily. Berserk. The gnolls' tight formation Su Len was directly broken. The barbarian guards following behind all roared. Immediately after, their muscles slightly bulged, and a powerful force emerged from their bodies. The weight of their equipment was obviously reduced in an instant. The berserk barbarian warriors did not waste any time and instantly rushed into the gap created by Su Len. The battle became abnormally fierce as soon as it began. The barbarian warriors wielding two-handed axes cut through the gnolls' defenses. The heavy armor did not provide much protection as flesh and blood flew everywhere. In just a moment, the gnolls were dead. Seeing that a large number of gnolls had died while only a few humans had suffered light injuries, Hog finally could not hold it in anymore and charged forward with a roar. He waved the heavy flail in his hand and instantly clashed with a barbarian warrior. The sound of the hammer and axe colliding rang out. The barbarian's axe was flipped over, and then the hammer hit his breastplate and sent him flying. Fortunately, the breastplate from the blacksmith's shop was of high quality. The breastplate forged from fine iron was only slightly deformed. After knocking down the barbarian warrior, Hog did not have the slightest intention of letting him go. The flail in his hand drew an arc and once again swung towards the barbarian warrior. At this moment, a battle axe suddenly swept over. Not only did it directly send the flail flying, but it also continued to chop towards Hog. Hog's arm turned, and the flail turned in the air and once again smashed towards Johnson. Immediately after, there was the sound of metal colliding as the giant axe and the flail collided once again. Johnson waved his battle axe and pressed forward again. The heavy battle axe in his hand was like a windmill, and the sound of metal colliding continuously rang out. Clang, clang, clang. Hog swung the flail, and the shrill sound of the flail breaking through the air was constantly heard. However, after each collision, he took a step back, and the expression on his face became more and more angry. Although the chain was also a heavy weapon, it did not have an advantage in this kind of continuous battle. In the past, he always relied on his strength to suppress his opponents. He did not expect to be suppressed today. Under a series of attacks, Hog's body kept retreating, leaving a row of deep footprints on the ground. Su Luan once again swept across, and several jackalans were swept away by a huge force, which twisted their bodies out of shape. After killing these gnolls, he turned around and saw that the barbarian guards were killing the rest of the gnolls with all their might, while Johnson was constantly reducing Hog's living space. At this rate, the battle would end soon. Su Luan did not care about Johnson's battle. This was Johnson's battle. As the leader of the barbarians, Su Luan needed to kill him with strong strength. This was also the honor of the barbarians. A gnoll suspected to have the thin bloodline of Yeenagu, the king of gnolls, was definitely a manifestation of his bravery. Su Luan looked around. At this time, the whole camp was still in a state of chaos. However, without the barbarian guards around to prevent fire, the speed of the spread of the fire was obviously slowed down. At the same time, the leaders of some small tribes took advantage of this opportunity to gather the defeated troops. Su Luan took out the wind dragon flag from the storage space, and the wind elements surrounded him. He took a deep breath and injected the magic in his body into it. Then a violent wind element appeared, and a sudden north wind blew in the wilderness. The north wind whistled and swept across the battlefield, followed by an even more violent north wind. Tornado. The howling northern wind continued to swirl. In just a few breaths, it formed two tornadoes that were dozens of meters tall. Then, the two tornadoes moved quickly on the battlefield. Wherever they passed, everything, including the goblins, kobolds, gnolls, and even the burning tents, were swept up. Some tents were torn into countless pieces, and then fell in all directions with sparks. A large number of sparks fell on the tents, and the dry tents were quickly ignited. In just a few minutes, the whole camp was on fire. The two tornadoes continued to rage, rolling up a large number of flames. With the help of the wind, the flames spread faster. Soon, the two tornadoes became fire tornadoes. Countless goblins, gnolls, kobolds, and even trolls who did not have time to escape were caught in them. In a few breaths, they were burned to death by the flames, and then the fat in their bodies provided more fuel for the flames. The fire tornadoes moved quickly on the battlefield, and the tribal leaders who wanted to gather the soldiers became the targets of the fire tornadoes. The fire tornadoes swept across, and all the soldiers and tribal leaders were caught in them. After a few screams, there were no more sounds. A large number of flames flew from the fire tornadoes. The gnolls had a thick layer of fur, and when the flames landed on them, it was easy to ignite them. One by one, the gnolls became human torches. Because the tribes did not belong to each other, the camp, which was in chaos after the night attack, finally collapsed completely at this moment. The tornadoes raged for about 10 minutes, and then slowly dissipated. The whole camp had become a sea of fire, and only the open space where Su Luan and the barbarian guards were was not included. Just a moment ago, Johnson had swept away Hog's chain with his heavy axe and chopped off Hog's wrist with a chop. Then, he followed up with another chop with his axe. Hog's head the size of a watermelon instantly flew up, and Hog's body fell down. Johnson reached out and picked up the ferocious head, then raised it high and roared at the sky. "What the hell are you roaring for?" Su Luan rubbed his ears and kicked him until he was rolling on the ground. "Go clean up the battlefield and help the injured brothers." Johnson immediately went to work with his tail between his legs. With Hog's death, the most powerful gnoll tribe in the Allied army was eliminated. As for the remaining gnolls who escaped, they would probably immediately move away from this area, and this land would officially become Sullen's territory. The fire raged, and Su Luan did not care about the escaping monsters. He turned around and left the camp with the barbarian guards. As for capturing captives, Su Luan did not even have 40 people with him this time. In such a chaotic battlefield, there was no hurry to capture captives. At this time, except for the gnolls in the camp, most of the rest had died in the sea of fire, and a small number were directly killed by Su Len and the others. After the night attack, the tribes in the nearby wilderness disappeared at this moment. Chapter 47. Congratulations, host, you have obtained an epic victory. Under your command and leadership, a small army of 36 people successfully launched a night attack and fire attack on the Wasteland Tribe's allied forces. You have obtained a glorious victory. All the surrounding Wasteland tribes have been defeated by you. You have obtained the true ownership of this wasteland. Your name has spread far and wide. Some of the smaller tribes are filled with fear of you. Your victory has caused the other tribes to raise their eyebrows. Prestige +3. The battle has ended. You have killed 2,375 enemies. 3 of your barbarians have been injured. You have obtained 28,743 experience points. Your level has been raised. Congratulations, host. You have received 2 free attribute points and 2 skill points. You have obtained a golden chest. Congratulations, host. You have defeated an army of 100 times your size 3 times in a row. You have received the title, 1 against 100. 1 against 100, after obtaining this achievement, you and your hero's army will have a permanent +10 morale. Command +10. In this battle, you have obtained 30 tempered iron essence. You have obtained the skill, Crimson Flame. Su Len added the 2 attribute points to his strength. His strength had increased to 33. Name, Sullen Race, Human Strength, 33 Agility, 29 Spirit, 24 Vitality, 29 Charm, 19 Skills, omitted, not the word count. Su Len looked at his attribute panel. The rewards from this battle were quite generous. Apart from the basic attributes, he had also obtained an achievement title. Both morale and command were increased by 10 points. This increased the overall strength of his troops. In the long run, it was worth it. The Crimson Flame skill was also quite good. Its effect was to summon flames in an area. It was quite good for setting fire, but the area of effect was a bit small. It could only cover a dozen square meters. With the 2 skill points, Su Len thought for a moment and upgraded the Thunder Gun. It became the Thunder Lightning Gun. Its effect was to increase his attributes and increase his lightning damage. After using his attribute points and skill points, Su Len deliberately washed his hands with water. Then, he took a deep breath and opened his storage space. At this moment, there were many things piled up inside. Aside from the tempered iron essences, there was also a golden treasure chest. This was the second time Su Len had opened a golden treasure chest, so he had some experience. He opened the golden treasure chest, and the golden light disappeared. A palm-sized token appeared before him. Congratulations, host, you've obtained a recruitment token. Recruitment token, this is a token with a magical ability. After using it, you can recruit people for your territory. The effect depends on the situation around your territory. Looking at the attributes of the recruitment order, Su Len was overjoyed. This was truly a timely help. One must know that he was currently worrying about how to recruit people. Although the territory had a large population, the number of free people was too small. Relying on slaves was not a solution. He picked up the recruitment token and played with it for a while. The material used to make the token was neither gold nor wood. It was very strange. One side of the token was engraved with the word recruit, while the other side had a drawing of a person. After looking at it for a while, Su Len chose to use the recruitment token. A light flashed, and the recruitment token disappeared. The host has used the recruitment token. In the next month, the host's territory will become more attractive to other intelligent races such as humans, gnomes, gnolls, kobolds, trolls, and other hostile creatures. That's it? Su Len waited for a long time, but nothing happened. He did not see anyone. If there are no humans around my territory, does that mean I can't recruit people? System. Say something. UF*Ker, my territory is in the wilderness. Where can I find free people in the wilderness? This is a huge loss. When Su Len heard the system's notification, his face instantly darkened. System, this is a fake product. Compensate me for my golden treasure chest. Seeing that no one appeared, Su Len kept calling the system. However, the system in his mind did not respond. No matter how he called, the system did not respond. After a while, Su Len could only accept it helplessly. The fire burned until 10:00 in the morning before gradually extinguishing. The original camp of the Tribal Alliance army had completely disappeared, leaving only a charred empty space. Other than that, there were also a large number of burnt corpses. Su Len had already started to retreat with the barbarian guards. In the battle in the early morning, only a few of the barbarian guards were injured. The most seriously injured one of them was the one who was sent flying by the Knoll leader Hog's chain. One of his ribs was broken. Su Len used a physical healing spell on him. Green life energy enveloped him, and soon his injuries were completely healed. Because this battle was a night attack and a fire attack, there were not many spoils of war. The Knolls had at least a few hundred pieces of iron armor and weapons. The best set was the one on the Knoll leader. Although they killed more than 2,000 enemies in this battle, there were definitely more who escaped. In the end, Su Len and the others only captured more than 200 captives in this battle. The fate of these captives was to be captured and sent to the camp as laborers. When they left, it only took them 5 or 6 hours to rush back. When they came back, they brought many captives with them. They walked for a whole day. In the evening, Su Len and the others finally returned to the territory. Seeing that they had returned with a great victory, the people who stayed in the territory could finally breathe a sigh of relief. There was no other way. This territory could only stand in the wilderness because of the strength of Su Len and the barbarian guards. After knowing that Su Len had wiped out the Tribal Alliance army in the wilderness, the whole territory was excited. Su Len was also very excited. He directly announced that there would be a victory banquet tonight. He asked his subordinates to go to the warehouse and take out the stored ale and dried meat. He also asked the barbarians to slaughter a few spotted antelopes. A bonfire was lit in the open space outside the Lord's castle, and a simple bonfire party began. Although the bonfire party was very simple, the barbarians were still very happy. The party went on until late at night, and more than 10 barrels of ale were all drunk. Then, these drunk barbarians were single-handedly carried back by their respective tigresses. After defeating all the tribes in the wilderness around the territory, Su Len finally gained a foothold in the wilderness. After the territory was safe, Su Len began to think about the future development of the territory. As a territory, the territory had to ensure that it had enough military power. This required a lot of money. In the past, there had been powerful nobles who had also defeated the tribes around the wilderness. In the end, very few of them were able to hold on for a long time. The cost of maintaining a powerful army in the wastelands was so great that even a count would feel the pinch. Chapter 48. A cavalryman would cost 70 kinnar a year, including at least 10 kinnar to maintain the horses, at least 10 kinnar for weapons and armor, and the salary of the soldiers. In the Kingdom of Florence, a cavalryman's monthly salary was 1 kinnar, which was 12 kinnar a year. In addition, a cavalryman had to be accompanied by at least 2 auxiliary soldiers. Although the cost of these auxiliary soldiers was not as high as the cavalryman, it was not a small amount in a year. This did not include the value of the horses and the loss rate of the horses. A qualified warhorse would cost at least 30 kinnar. The horses of the cavalrymen would often be damaged, which was another large expense. In addition, as a pioneering territory, the early materials had to be transported from the country, which caused the cost of a cavalryman to be far more than 70 kinnar. Sometimes, it would even double. Therefore, the basic cost of maintaining 1,000-man cavalrymen in the pioneering territory would cost 100,000 kinnar. This was only the cost of the army. The cost of building the territory, recruiting orders, and purchasing slaves would not be lower than this. Therefore, although pioneering territory seemed to be a very glorious thing, when it was done, one would find that without a strong financial support, it was simply impossible to do so. The annual income of a count's territory plus other income was about 100,000 knar. How many pioneering nobles could come up with this amount of money? Even if they could come up with so much money, the investment would have to be reaped. How much could they reap from the pioneering territory? The biggest gain would be land. If it was just farming, the investment would not be recovered for at least 20 years. Of course, there were some pioneering territories that did not cost too much, but most of those territories were close to human cities. There were not many surrounding wilderness tribes, and they were weak. They only needed to maintain a small army to protect the territory, and the transportation of various materials was also close. The amount of knar spent was not much, but these places had long been occupied. These pioneering territories could not be taken by just anyone. For example, Solon's pioneering order clearly stated that he had to be 300 miles away from Blackstone City to establish his territory. Otherwise, the Kingdom of Florence had the right to take back the territory. As for the nearest expansion orders, they only needed to be 50 miles away from Blackrock City. Of course, there was a limit to this expansion order. The territory could only be within a radius of 10 miles. Although there were many benefits to developing a territory close to the city, the territory was very small. More importantly, there were very few mineral resources. After all the valuable minerals had been discovered close to the city. Although Solon's territory was far away, there was no requirement for the size of the territory. In theory, as long as you were strong enough, you could always expand outwards. However, in reality, it was very difficult for most people to defend their territory. Expanding outwards was even more impossible. Then, did anyone succeed? This was for sure. Some lucky bastards discovered gold, silver, and other precious minerals when they were developing their territory. Immediately, a large number of nobles and merchants would come to support them. They would help them develop their territory and provide them with resources, all for the right to mine gold and other precious minerals. There were also some protagonists who discovered mithril and silver mines and received support from a large number of wizards. Mithril was a very important magic metal. It was very rare. In the Second Age of the Elves, it was a very precious metal. Many powerful magic equipment made by the elves used mithril. The distribution of mithril was completely irregular, and the reserves of mithril that had been discovered so far were very small. Most of the mithril ores were associated with silver ores. If there was an ounce of mithril produced every year, then the mine could be called a rich mine. However, this kind of mine was very rare. Many mines that produced mithril only produced 3 to 5 ounces a year. If mithril was found in Solon's territory, then within 3 days, a group of wizards would come to support him in developing his territory. If he wanted resources, he would have resources. If he wanted knar, he would have knar. The wizards would even help him in person. However, mithril was something that could only be obtained by luck. Sulan didn't think he was that lucky. At this point, his territory had to find a profitable place as soon as possible. Whether it was gold, silver, or even copper, iron, or other resources in his territory, he could use these resources to attract merchants to trade. With merchants, Sulan could obtain all kinds of resources, collect taxes, and then use these resources to slowly develop his territory. After solving the external problems, Sulan brought a few barbarian warriors to look for minerals in his territory. His goal was an iron mine. When he was fighting with the gnolls, goblins, kobolds, and trolls, Sulan found that these tribes had a small amount of iron. The iron was crudely made, the quality was poor, and there was even slag that had not been taken out. Even a blacksmith's apprentice's craftsmanship was better than this, but they were still iron. Not long ago, Sulan had interrogated the captives and obtained the approximate location of this iron mine. Then he brought a few barbarian warriors to look for minerals. Speaking of which, Solon's barbarian guards had all evolved into barbarian warriors, and a small half of them had even become barbarian axe warriors. Any one of them could easily defeat a knight. According to the information given by the Knolls, the iron mine was located in the northeast of the territory, about 50 miles away from the camp. Sulen and the others were very fast. After 2 hours, they were close to the target area. To Su Luan's surprise, the location of the iron mine was easy to find. They only patrolled a few times here and found the iron mine. The iron mine was located on a hill, bare and sparsely vegetated. Looking from a distance, there was nothing else. After approaching, they found many traces of excavation on the other side of the hillside. When they arrived, they also found some kobolds gathered here. They found a mine and even gave away miners. This was a good thing for Sulen. Sulen casually picked up a stone from the ground. It was slightly heavy and had a reddish-brown appearance. If he was not wrong, it was an iron ore. From the looks of it, this iron ore was of good quality. I didn't expect this to be an open-air mine. Looking at the mine in front of him, Sulen was very excited. One had to know that there was a big difference between an open-air mine. Although some minerals were rich in reserves, they were very difficult to mine. Some were even impossible to mine. Some were buried in the mountains or underground and needed to be excavated. The simplest open-air mine was the one in front of him. There was no need to excavate, they could just mine directly. Chapter 49. The cost of open mining was very low, and it was much safer than the mines. If this mine appeared in the Kingdom of Florence, the surrounding nobles would definitely fight for it. Although it was only an iron mine, the investment was low, and the profits were higher than the average silver mine. After confirming the location of the mine, Sulen opened the strategic map and looked at it. He wanted to find the nearest route to the territory. Soon, Sulen found something on the map. There was a river about 1 kilometer away from the mine. Sulen went to check it out. The river was between 8 to 13 meters wide and 2 to 3 meters deep. The flow was average, so it was just an ordinary river. However, this small river was actually a tributary of the Whitewater River. If it continued for about 3 kilometers in the northeast direction, it would merge into the Whitewater River. Then, it would flow upstream along the Whitewater River and finally return to the territory's pier. With this river, the ore mined from the mine could be transported to the territory by water. Water transportation had too many advantages over land transportation. Not only was the volume large, the speed was fast, and the cost was low. The river was 3 meters deep and 8 meters wide. Although it couldn't handle large ships, it was more than enough to transport iron ore. Slaves were also used to mine the ore, so the cost was also very low. In addition, Sulen's territory had already used the hydraulic forging machine, so the labor cost was reduced again. As for the furnace and fuel to smelt the ore, the cost was also very low. The cost of this part was also very low. There were trees everywhere in the wasteland, and they could also use slaves to cut them down. In this way, the cost of forging a piece of tempered iron was shockingly low. For example, the equipment Sulen made for his barbarian guards would cost at least 200 kinnar in Kalt. However, in Sulen's territory, the cost of this set of equipment was only 30 kinnar at most. Excluding the labor cost and transportation cost, the most expensive forging cost was also replaced by the hydraulic forging machine. The new blast furnace in the territory increased the production and lowered the cost again. Therefore, the cost of this set of equipment was so low. Even if Sulen sold the equipment at 150 kinnar per set, he could easily make a large profit. Moreover, such a low price could also attract merchants who were willing to take the risk to trade here. Having made his decision, Sulen didn't stay here any longer. He had the 2 barbarian warriors instruct the kobolds to build houses here, while Sulen hurried back to his territory. There were 1,500 goblins, kobolds, and gnolls in the territory. Among them, the goblins were the most numerous, with about 700 of them. The kobolds were second with about 500, and the gnolls had about 200 of them. Although the kobolds weren't very strong, they were good at mining. Sulen planned to send these 500 kobolds to the mine to mine. In addition to the 200 kobolds in the mine, there were close to 800 kobold miners, which was more than enough. They also needed to form a team to protect the mine. However, this meant that the territory, which had a sufficient population, became short of manpower again. Su Len already felt that his barbarian guards were lacking in manpower. There were very few freedmen in the territory, so he couldn't recruit human soldiers. As for the barbarian women and children, some of them could join the reserve force, and many of the barbarian youths would come of age next year. Even so, distant water couldn't quench the immediate thirst. This situation couldn't be changed in a short period of time. The recruitment order he used last time hadn't even recruited a single person. Su Len had completely given up. He planned to mine some iron ore and bring it back to forge weapons. After the weapons were forged, he would have Xian transport the weapons to Cult to sell them. With the low cost here, even if the price was lowered, he could still make a lot of money. Once he had money, he would go to the slave market to buy serfs or other slaves. These slaves would be used to fill the lack of population in the territory. Other than that, Su Len also planned to advertise his territory in the surrounding cities to attract the commoners who wanted to obtain land to become freedmen. Because there hadn't been any war in the surrounding areas of Cult for decades, the population had skyrocketed. Many people were born without land. In this world, property was inherited by the eldest son. The other sons would become independent once they reached adulthood. This situation caused many people to have no farmland or money, so they could only work in the cities. Most of the mercenaries were like this. Those who owned land rarely migrated. Sullen's territory held no attraction for them. Only those who had nothing would be willing to take the risk and cross hundreds of miles to live in Sullen's territory. Sullen's target was these people. He wanted to recruit them to become his freedmen. Although most of these people had no assets, as long as they worked hard in the territory, Su Len would pay them wages and let them set up a family business in the territory. Alternatively, he would sell the land to them in installments. In fact, Su Len was already considering restoring the freedom of his serfs. Of course, he wouldn't do that now. He planned to let these slaves work for a few years and then revoke their status step by step, making them free. Although it seemed that Su Luen had suffered a great loss by releasing the slaves, in fact, this was not the case. When they were slaves, they naturally wouldn't work as slaves. Even if they were forced to work, their efficiency would be high. Although it would save money, it wouldn't create much value. However, if Su Len made an agreement with them, as long as they worked hard for him for a few years, their status as slaves would be pardoned and they would become free. In that case, the motivation of these slaves would definitely increase by leaps and bounds. After a few years, when these slaves became free, they would naturally want a better life. Then, they would definitely work harder and contribute to Sullen's taxes. In this way, the value they would create would be much higher than the value of the slaves. Of course, Su Len didn't do this right from the start. After all, the power of tradition in this world was still very strong. At least, he was going to wait until he was stronger before doing this. If he was in the south, Su Len would probably be worried about the influence of the surrounding territories. However, in the northern wasteland, where the mountains were high and the emperor was far away, basically no one would care. P.S. Thank you to Shurya Art for your 100 Chidian coins. Thank you to Dejected Death for your 100 Chidian coins. Chapter 50. North of the northern wilderness, in the Sierra de Lotus, about 300 kilometers away from Sullen's territory, on an icy peak. The cold wind from the polar ice field whistled past. It was already a world of ice and snow. Snowflakes floated in the sky. As the cold wind blew, countless ice crystals spun and formed small whirlwinds. Boom! A mature bison that weighed close to a ton was thrown on a cliff. A gust of wind blew past, and then a huge black shadow fell from the sky. It had a grayish-white body, a pair of fleshy wings, and sharp claws that looked like they were made of steel easily left deep scratches on the rock that was frozen like steel. Its appearance was very similar to the pterosaurs of the dinosaur era, but compared to the pterosaurs, it was much bigger. Any adventurer who had learned how to identify monsters would be able to recognize that it was a Cryopterus at a glance. Cryopterus. The cold-type Euron was a type of pterosaur. It looked very similar to the pterosaurs, but because of its impure bloodline, pterosaurs did not have dragon scales, only a layer of dragon skin. They had strong hind limbs, and their forelimbs were attached to the wing bones of their wings. This made it very difficult for them to move on the ground. By sacrificing their ability to move on the ground, they had a stronger flying ability than the pure-blood dragons. Cryopterus usually lived in small groups on the top of mountains in cold areas. The Cryopterus in front of them was an adult male pterosaur. At this time, it had just returned from a hunt. The bison that weighed a ton had been frozen stiff, but this did not affect the pterosaur's appetite. A female pterosaur that was similar in appearance but slightly larger in size was using her sharp teeth to bite the most tender part of the bison's meat. This female pterosaur had some difficulty moving, and her abdomen was obviously a little protruding. It was obvious that this pterosaur was about to lay eggs. It was difficult for dragons to reproduce. Pterosaurs would lay eggs about once every 3 to 5 years. Each time, they would lay 3 to 7 eggs. A dragon's roar was heard, and the surrounding sky was filled with the sound of flapping wings. Then, a few Cryopterus landed on the surrounding cliffs. In the early morning, when the first ray of sunlight shone into the room, Sulen woke up on time. He rubbed his forehead to get rid of the sleepiness. After putting on his clothes, Sulen yawned and walked out of the room. He had been running back and forth between the territory and the mine for the past few days. Although he was not physically tired, he was a little annoyed. He needed more management staff. Otherwise, he would have to manage so many things. He was prepared to enjoy being a lord. He did not want to be surrounded by mountains of official business every day. Breakfast was oatmeal with some jerky, wild vegetables, and so on. The heat was just right, and a big bowl of oatmeal directly awakened his taste buds. Sulen drank 2 bowls in one go, patted his belly, and left the restaurant. After breakfast, Sulen first went to check on the various construction sites in the territory, took care of some things, and then went to patrol around the territory. Because of the mine, there were fewer slaves reclaiming land outside the town. At this time, more than 6,000 acres of land had been reclaimed in the territory, and hundreds of serfs were planting potatoes. After patrolling around the territory, Sulen went to the mine again. This time, Sulen went to the mine by boat. Just yesterday, the construction of the port in the Whitewater River had been completed. Boarding the boat at the port, it could directly go down the river. It only took half an hour to reach the mine. The water in this part of the Whitewater River was not turbulent, so although the quality of the boats made in Sulen's territory was poor, they could still sail. Soon, Sulen went ashore near the mine. At this time, the port had become a construction site. A large number of slaves were digging near the river. Because the river was 1 kilometer away from the mine, he was going to dig a canal here to reach the mine. Beacon. Just as he was about to go ashore, he suddenly heard a loud shout. Sulen looked up and saw in the blue sky a beacon rising in the distance. A beacon, more than 100 people. I didn't expect there to be a tribe here. Seeing the beacon, Sulen laughed. We don't have many slaves here. Catch all of them to mine. A few barbarians beside him couldn't help but pull out their weapons and look in the direction of the beacon. They were eager to fight. Go, let's go directly. Sulen took out his spear, pointed with the tip, and led a few barbarians in that direction. Soon, Sulen and the others arrived at the beacon. The beacon was built on a mound, and they could see everything from here. Standing on top and looking out, he saw a group of about 100 black figures slowly moving towards them from the distant wilderness. Sulen shaded his eyes with his hand and looked carefully for a while. Those black figures weren't goblins or kobolds, but more like humans. As time passed, those black figures got closer and closer. Soon, Sulen saw clearly that those people were indeed humans, the Northern Barbarians. The Northern Barbarians was the general name given by the Kingdom of Florence to the humans living in the northern wilderness. For example, the the barbarians under Sulen were a branch of the northern barbarians. Most of the northern barbarians lived in tribes. They were tall and were half nomadic and half farming. In fact, each tribe was equivalent to a race. No one knew exactly how many races there were. Under Sulen's gaze, the group of northern barbarians stopped about 300 meters away from the beacon. Then, under Sulen's surprised gaze, they walked over with a white flag on a spear. Just as Sulen was puzzled, the system notification suddenly sounded. Ding! Congratulations to the host. Because they admire your bravery, a group of northern barbarians wishes to join you. This is the effect of the recruitment order. Sulen's eyes widened. He had already forgotten about this matter. He did not expect it to actually work. Boss, that person is coming. Should we attack? A barbarian beside him suddenly reminded. No need. Sulen stopped a few guys behind him who were eager to attack, then looked at the person. Don't attack. I am the leader of the giant bear tribe, Boulder. I came with good intentions. I request to see the Lord Sulen. Boulder placed his right hand on his chest and bowed. This barbarian called Boulder was also a barbarian, but the tattoo on his body was a giant bear. As the leader, he was the strongest warrior in the giant bear tribe. He was 3 meters tall, not inferior to Johnson at all. His muscles were firm and well-proportioned, and he looked very powerful. However, their clothes were very shabby and were basically made of animal skin. Their appearance looked very dirty. It was obvious that these people were not living well. I am Sulen. Why are you looking for me? Sulen came down from the beacon, empty-handed, and walked over with a relaxed expression. Chapter 51. You're Sir Sulen? Boulder looked at Sulen in surprise. He never thought that someone who was shorter than the average height of their tribe would be Sulen. I don't think anyone here would dare to pretend to be me. Sulen shrugged and said. He was now very curious about these people. How did the recruitment order recruit them? Dear Monsignor Sulen, I greet you on behalf of the entire giant bear tribe. Boulder quickly said. You don't have to greet me. Sulen waved his hand and pointed. Are you guys migrating? Boulder was a little embarrassed. He hesitated and continued, Monsignor Sulen, the giant bear tribe would like to join your territory and pledge our loyalty to you. Please accept us. As soon as he finished speaking, Sulen heard the system prompt again. The giant bear tribe would like to pledge their loyalty to you and apply to join your territory. Do you accept? Is that so? That's great. Welcome to the team. Sulen agreed without hesitation when he heard the notification. Then, a new team appeared on his system interface. Giant Bear Tribe, Northern Barbarians. Number, 153. Loyalty, 85. Morale, 70. There were more detailed data below. There were 38 barbarians in this group. The strongest one was a level 3 barbarian warrior, just like Johnson. The rest were level 2 barbarian warriors. The rest were the elderly, women, and children. With the addition of the giant bear tribe, Sulen's military power doubled. Although it seemed that the new giant bear tribe warriors were a little weak, they would quickly level up after a few battles. Therefore, Sulen was not worried about their strength. Although Sulen wanted to expand the heavy infantry, he actually preferred to have archers. His territory only had one type of unit, which made him easy to be targeted. For example, if he encountered cavalry or even more disgusting mounted archers, he wouldn't be able to run as fast as them, nor would he be able to catch up to them. So, adding a few more types of units to cooperate in battle was the best choice. After that, Boulder brought more than 100 people into Sulen's territory. Sulen gave a few simple instructions and led Boulder and the rest to the town. After returning to the territory, Sulen asked people to prepare food for them while he communicated with Boulder. After a while, he had a rough understanding of the giant bear tribe. The giant bear tribe originally lived in the northeast of Sulen's territory, near the Sierra de Lotus. However, not long ago, a group of Cryopteris came to the Sierra de Lotus. These Cryopteris built their nests in the Sierra de Lotus and used it as their hunting area. In the face of the Cryopteris, the giant bear tribe could not resist at all. They could only migrate to the south. It was during the migration that they heard of Sullen's reputation. After learning that Sulan had a group of powerful barbarian warriors under him, they decided to try to join. In the past, there were barbarians who wanted to join the kingdom of Florence, but not many succeeded. After all, although barbarians were strong, they were not suitable for recruiting soldiers. Therefore, there were very few lords and cities that were willing to accept them. When Sulan heard that there was a group of Cryopteris in the Sierra de Lotus, he was very surprised. After all, although Cryopteris were not pure-blooded dragons, they were still very strong. In fact, in this world, as long as one had a relationship with dragons, they were not weak. Even the weakest dragon descendant, the kobold descendant, was not weaker than a barbarian warrior. The kobold descendant had mastered at least one spell, and it was basically the fireball spell. Although the fireball spell was a common skill in the game in his previous life, in this world, the fireball spell was a powerful level 3 evocation skill. One fireball spell could damage or even destroy the best armor in Sullen's territory. Cryopteris was even stronger. The Gale tiger that Sulan killed before was like a little brother to Cryopteris. Cryopteris also inherited the breath of the pure-blooded dragons. Although it was not as powerful as a real dragon, it was still not to be underestimated. However, this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that Cryopteris could fly. As long as it did not land, it could only passively take a beating. As for arrows, for Cryopteris with their tough dragon skin, ordinary arrows were equivalent to scratching an itch. They could not break through their defense at all. Only the special arrows shot from the special crossbow could threaten them. Of course, if the distance was too far, the crossbow would not be able to exert its power. In fact, Cryopteris was not necessarily comparable to the ground dragons in terms of destructive power. In fact, when the number of ground dragons reached a certain level, the power they could unleash was even more amazing. But who asked them to be able to fly? After Sulan heard that there were frost dragons in the Sierra de Lotus, he wondered if he should catch one. Of course, it would be great if he could catch one as a mount. Not only was it powerful, but it could also fly. He remembered that the Lorenz kingdom wanted to form a pterosaur knight regiment, but so far, the number of knights in the regiment had not exceeded 50. Although Cryopteris was a Euron, its value was still very high. First of all, the dragon skin could be used to make dragon leather armor. This kind of leather armor was comparable to iron armor in terms of defense, and it was also light and easy to carry. Dragon blood was also a good magic material, and the rest of the internal organs were essential materials for refining many kinds of magic potions. A complete Cryopteris corpse could be sold for at least 10,000 or 20,000 kinar. As for the dragon egg, it was difficult to estimate its value. If there was a way to tame a Euron, it would naturally be worth tens of thousands of kinar. If there was no way to tame it, it would not be so valuable. Although Euron did not have the inheritance of a real dragon, they could still pass down some things from their genetic memory. It was very difficult to tame them. According to Boulder, the group of Cryopteris was only 200 kilometers away from his territory at most. At such a close distance, the frost pterosaur could fly there at full speed for an hour. It could be said that Sullen's current location was also within the hunting range of the frost pterosaur. If Suluan was alone, the ice Quetzalcoatlus wouldn't be much of a threat. As long as it dared to attack him, Suluan was 100% sure that he could kill it. But for the territory, other than Johnson, everyone was a match for the ice Quetzalcoatlus. Even Johnson could only passively defend. He lacked long-range attacks, so the territory's hands were tied when dealing with such a large flying monster. It seems that I need to make a few ballistas as soon as possible. Sulan thought to himself. It just so happened that the 30 pieces of refined iron from the last battle were just right to make ballistas. Chapter 52. Su Len was lying on a rocking chair under a tree, munching on sunflower seeds. Not far away, a fierce battle was taking place. Both sides were barbarians, but the scene was a little strange. The battle was completely one-sided, but this kind of result was actually very normal. After all, one side was a newly joined giant bear tribe and was only a level 2 barbarian, while his opponent was a level 4 giant axe warrior. There was a difference of 2 levels between the two sides. Boom! A figure fell heavily to the ground. The winner was decided. This battle was not arranged by Su Len. In fact, it was requested by Boulder. He wanted to show Su Len the bravery of the bear tribe's warriors. Su Len tried to persuade him not to fight. He believed in their bravery, but Boulder felt that Su Len was just patronizing him, so he insisted on fighting with Johnson. Su Len could only agree. What happened next almost made Boulder think that they were fighting frost giants. In front of Johnson and the others, the young men in his tribe were like children who had just learned to walk. They were no match for them at all. It was just that he had arranged to have sex with her. No, the battle that he had arranged, even if he had tears in his eyes, he had to finish it. When the last warrior was thrown out of the arena, the battle finally ended. Looking at the despondent Boulder, Su Len felt a little guilty. Had he gone too far this time? He wanted to comfort him, but in the next second, Boulder dragged Johnson to eat. The arrival of more than 100 barbarians from the bear tribe doubled the number of warriors in the territory. However, the food supply became tight again. These barbarians all had huge appetites. They ate 2 to 3 times more than a normal person. After a long period of hunting around the territory, the prey had learned to be smart and would consciously avoid Su Len's territory. As a result, in addition to fishing every day, there were fewer and fewer game. The winter in the northern wilderness was very long, at least 4 months, so Su Len had to prepare enough food to survive the winter. If they couldn't find food in the wastelands, they would have to buy it in Kalt. They needed Kinner to buy food, and the territory could be said to be extremely poor right now. They simply did not have the money to buy food. Left with no choice, Su Len began to rummage through his belongings to see if there was anything he could use to exchange for money. There were a dozen or so low-quality gems in one box. These were spoils of war from previous battles, and their quality varied. If they were sold like this, they would be worth 300 to 400 Kinner at most. There were also some weapons and equipment, but because they had been given to the barbarians, there weren't many left. If they were all sold, they could be sold for around 1,000 Kinner. After a rough calculation, there were still 1,400 pieces of Kinner left. After deducting all kinds of taxes, they could buy about 10 wagons worth of supplies from Kalt. In the past, with so many supplies, they could survive the winter if they were frugal. However, with the addition of 500 serfs and 150 barbarians, the supplies could only last them for a month at most. 5,000 mu of potatoes had been planted outside the town. These potatoes would take 3 to 4 months to mature. Only then would the territory be considered to have sufficient food. Therefore, Su Len had to prepare at least 4 months' worth of food in their territory. But now, the territory's food reserves could only last them for a month and a half at most. The gap was as high as 2.5 months. Playing with the gems in his hand, Su Len suddenly thought of processing these gems into jewelry. After all, the profit from selling raw materials was a few times or even a dozen times greater than the profit from selling finished products. Su Len had seen a lot of jewelry from this world at his cheap father's place. To be honest, the craftsmanship of this world's jewelry was not very good. The shapes were monotonous and the styles were old-fashioned. They could not be compared to the jewelry he saw in his previous world. After finding a few craftsmen, Su Len handed the gems to them to be polished. Then, he took out a piece of parchment and began to design the jewelry. Because the craftsman's skills were limited, Su Len did not dare to design too complicated a design. He only drew a few simple sketches from his memory. To make this batch of jewelry, Su Len melted the few pieces of Kinner he had into gold and let the craftsman work on them. The gold was soft, so Su Len added some other metals to it to increase the strength of the jewelry. Of course, he would not admit that the gold was insufficient. After a few days, the jewelry Su Len designed was finally completed. The most valuable one was a pair of bracelets. The best quality gemstones in the treasure chest were a ruby and a sapphire. These two gemstones were embedded in the bracelets. The bracelets were shaped in the image of a phoenix. Su Len modified them according to the phoenix images he saw in his previous world. In the end, the bracelets could be called a piece of art. The two gemstones were polished and cut before they were embedded in the bracelets. The cut gemstones were embedded in the eyes and the tail. The largest gemstone was embedded in the body. Monseigneur, this pair of bracelets is so beautiful. It's like a piece of art that only elves can make. Cooley, who had just become a jewelry master, praised. That's right, Lord Ju. This pair of bracelets is so beautiful. The design you designed is amazing. The craftsmen racked their brains to describe this pair of jewelry bracelets with their own limited vocabulary. Wait, what did you just say? Su Len suddenly interrupted. This pair of bracelets is beautiful? The craftsmen looked at each other and said. No, it's in the front. Su Len shook his head and continued. A piece of art that only elves can make? Another craftsman asked carefully. That's it. Su Len clapped his hands and said excitedly, an elven piece of art. Then, the exquisite pieces of jewelry left the place excitedly. An elven piece of art? The craftsmen looked at each other and then lowered their heads to continue with their work. Su Len took the exquisite jewelry back to the house and asked someone to call Xian. What do you think of these pieces of jewelry? Superb craftsmanship, exquisite beyond compare. Jean exclaimed in admiration as he looked at the pieces of jewelry in astonishment. These are elven pieces of jewelry, Su Len said calmly. What? Xian was confused. I mean, claim that these pieces of jewelry are elven pieces of art. Su Len emphasized the word elven. But. Xian was hesitant. No buts. Su Len interrupted. These are elven pieces of art. Such exquisite jewelry can only be made by elves, right? Chapter 53. Jean, don't feel any psychological pressure. In all fairness, aren't these jewelry exquisite? Su Len picked up a piece of jewelry and said to Jean. Yes, these jewelry are the most exquisite jewelry I've ever seen. Jean nodded and said. That's it. We need to give him a reasonable price for this exquisite jewelry. Su Len said. As for jewelry made by real elves, how many people have seen it now? Su Len picked up the bracelets in the shape of the phoenix and said, since few people have seen it, what are you worried about? When the time comes, you can say that it was found in the ruins, and then with a little guidance, with the degree of delicacy of these jewelry, those people will naturally believe it. Why did Su Len have to drag these jewelry to the elves? It was very simple, because of the price. In the human countries, the nobles were very popular with the things left by the elves, so as long as it was related to the elves, the price would be at least several times higher. His cheap father's second wife brought a necklace from her parents' home that was said to be made by the elves, which was said to be a wedding gift prepared by her father, Marquis Osborne. Su Len also saw it several times at the time. To be honest, the necklace was indeed beautifully made, but it was similar to the jewelry in his hands. This was also the reason why he dared to pretend that the jewelry was made by the elves. The elves had returned to the elven forest for hundreds of thousands of years, and there were only a few pieces of jewelry made by the elves, so Su Len was not worried at all that this would be exposed. Jean was indeed a business-minded guy. After being reminded by Su Len, he immediately prepared a set of excuses, and then after Su Len filled in the gaps, a story was made up by him. Originally, the price of these exquisite jewelry was more than 1,000 kinnar at most, but now with the blessing of the elves' background, it could be sold for at least 5,000 kinnar. 5,000 kinnar, all bought into food, was enough to support his territory through the winter. After discussing with Jean, Su Len asked him to go back and prepare. The caravan would set off in a few days. This time, Su Len was going to let half of the new barbarians go, and Johnson was going to take half of them, in order to let the new barbarians experience several battles and grow up as soon as possible. With the veterans like Johnson, Su Len didn't have to worry about the new barbarians being at a disadvantage. The goblins, kobolds, gnolls and so on they encountered along the way would be leveled up after a few rounds. After dealing with the matter, Su Len, he began to deal with the territories facing the territory. Generally speaking, the ice Quetzalcoatlus would not attack humans because compared to the bison, deer, and antelope in the wilderness, the risk of attacking humans was higher, so it was safe here for the time being. However, after winter, animal activities in the wilderness would be scarce, and the ice Quetzalcoatlus would likely attack humans when there was not enough prey. Su Len couldn't entrust the safety of his territory to the ice Quetzalcoatlus, so the best way was to make a ballista. Before this, Su Len had made a ballista and was very familiar with the structure of the ballista. More importantly, he later obtained mechanical control and a lot of mechanical knowledge, so he had some ways to improve the ballista. There were also ballistas in this world. They were called ballistas, giant ballistas, and other different names, but in fact, they were the same thing. The ballista's structure was complicated, and it was very difficult to operate. A ballista required 8 to 10 people to complete. The range of the ballista could reach up to 1,000 meters, but in fact, it was not very powerful at this distance, let alone accuracy. In fact, the effective range of the ballista was between 400 and 600 meters. Of course, it was difficult to guarantee the accuracy. This kind of ballista was powerful. It used a 2-meter-long javelin as a weapon. It could shoot into a rammed earth city wall within 400 meters, and even a brick city wall could be more than a foot deep. Even Cryopteris would not be well off if it was shot by this kind of ballista. However, although this weapon was powerful, it also had many shortcomings. First of all, the loading speed was slow, and several strong men were needed to work together to load it. Second, the accuracy was low. Basically, after more than 200 meters, the ballista would lose its accuracy. Third, it was difficult to transport. The ballista was heavy, and generally, it was fixed on the city wall. Fourth, it was difficult to maintain. The bowstring used in the ballista was specially made. It was best to use the tendons of some high-grade magical beasts, but this kind of tendon was too rare and expensive. Therefore, most ballistas used specially processed cow tendons. Several cow tendons were wound into one, and silk and steel wire were mixed and wound. The bowstring made in this way had a short lifespan. Basically, the bowstring would need to be replaced after 6 or 7 times. There were also some other shortcomings. After Sulan's modification, although not all of these shortcomings were solved, they were improved a lot. The most obvious improvement was that the loading speed had increased. During the loading part, pulleys and levers were used. The operation of the ballista was also much easier. At the same time, the ballista was made of stainless steel, which made maintenance easier and increased its lifespan. Of course, this was not all good. As a result, the weight of the ballista increased again. Su Len divided the design of the ballista into various parts and let the blacksmith make them according to the drawings. In the end, he assembled all the parts himself. This way, only he knew the craftsmanship of the ballista. The bowstring of the ballista was made from the tendons of the stormwind tiger. After special processing, a total of 16 bowstrings were made. This time, Su Len planned to make 8 ballistas. 8 of the bowstrings would be installed directly, and the rest would be left as backups. The 8 ballistas were placed on the 4 sides of the town. Su Len had purposely built 8 high platforms in the town to install the ballistas. With these 8 ballistas, even Cryopteris would have to think twice before attacking. The construction of the territory was still proceeding in an orderly manner. The first batch of iron ore from the mines was also transported to the port by water. Although the speed of a boat going against the current was very slow and the boatman needed to paddle, it was still much faster than transporting it by land. Su Len knew very well what the conditions of the roads in the wilderness were like. In comparison, the amount of ore transported by ship was more than 10 times that of a horse carriage. After the ship docked, the goblin slaves who had been waiting for a long time began to unload the ore. The ore would then be sent to the furnace of the blacksmith. At the latest, the first batch of ironware produced by the mines would be ready the day after tomorrow. Chapter 54. Ding. The host's farming data has been loaded. When the farmlands outside the town reached 10,000 mu, Sulen suddenly heard the system prompt. He opened the system panel, and all kinds of data were clearly displayed. How much land was cultivated, and even the current state of the farmlands, drought, pest, disease, normal, good, and so on were all displayed in the data. With this farming system, Sulen's control over the territory became higher, and he could also provide various solutions according to the status of the farmlands. The system automatically divided the farmlands into 3 grades according to the fertility of the farmlands. Some of the 10,000 mu of farmlands had been allocated to the barbarians and the citizens of the town. As for the remaining 5,000 mu, he planned to sell them. Of course, because the population of the territory was still small, he had to wait until the population reached a certain size before he could sell them. According to the data of the Kingdom of Florence, a family of 4 would need at least 10 mu of land to survive. Of course, the actual situation was about 15 mu. After all, farming technology was limited, and the output was not stable. Plus, the barbarians were big eaters, so the number of farmlands would be doubled. When Sulen first built this territory, he built it on the scale of 5,000 people, so he needed at least 20,000 mu of farmlands. In addition, he also needed to raise soldiers, so the number of farmlands was naturally more. So, he planned to cultivate 30,000 mu of farmlands. If he cultivated all the land he occupied, it would be at least 100,000 mu, enough to support the early expansion of his territory. With farmlands, there would be food, and with iron ore, there would be weapons. It could be said that the basic conditions of his territory were very good. If this was in the Kingdom of Florence, such a territory would have been occupied long ago, and he would not have a chance. The only commodity in the territory now was weapons. The arms trade had a great political significance. It was fine to sell in small quantities, but if he wanted to sell in large quantities, he would have to get the permission of the nobles in the north. After all, this was an arms trade before he transmigrated. Sulen wanted to develop his territory, so he had to spend a lot of effort to find a way out of this trade. The wilderness was rich in wood resources. Of course, in this era, the development and utilization of the surrounding natural environment was still very limited. Basically, all the cities had forests outside. Unless the wood had a special use, the profits from these woods would be pitifully low even if they were transported to Cult. Northern wastelands. It was said that the area was 10 times larger than the entire Kingdom of Florence. There were all kinds of wild races living here. At the northernmost part of the northern wasteland was the polar glacier, which was the coldest place on the continent. It was said that frost giants and giant dragons lived there. To the east of the northern wastelands was the sea. To the south was Florence and the southern kingdoms. To the west was the desert of death. Sulen was located at the edge of the northern wastelands. The northern wastelands was actually what the southern countries called this place. In fact, it should be called the Endless Wastelands. In this wasteland, there were mountains, rivers, forests, grasslands, and even swamps. Every country wanted to take it for themselves, but after hundreds of years, there was still not much progress. Don't think that the wastelands were filled with races like gnolls and goblins. They were at the bottom of the food chain. Barbarian tribes, ogre tribes, centaur tribes, half-elves, and orc tribes were the middle layer of the Endless Wastelands. In addition to these, there were many unknown dangers living in this area. There were also many magical beasts living in the wastelands. For example, the Stormwind tiger Sulen killed last time was at the bottom of the list of high-level magical beasts. The Cryopterus was the most powerful magical beast. It was said that there were even legendary magical beasts living in some hidden areas of the wastelands. They were existences that could compete with pure-blooded giant dragons. If one day, a King Kong demon ape or Hydra suddenly appeared in the wastelands, Su Len wouldn't be surprised. Su Len was patrolling the surrounding wastelands with his men. He wanted to find resources that could be traded in his territory. If he was lucky enough to find a gold mine, then he would have all the funds to develop his territory. Unfortunately, gold was something that could only be hoped for. "Boss, it's already noon. Let's eat and rest first," a barbarian warrior reminded him. "It's already noon." Su Len looked at the sky and said, "Let's go hunt around and get some food. We'll continue looking after we're full." They found a high ground and started a fire to cook. 2 barbarian warriors went to hunt while the others stood guard around. Su Len opened the system's strategic map and marked it. In the past few days, he did find some resources, but none of them were worth developing. There was no gold mine in his territory. If he found a salt mine, it would be a big deal. Salt was a necessary condiment for humans and was a very important resource. If Su Len found a salt mine, he could quickly make a fortune by selling it. Unfortunately, he didn't find a salt lake or a salt mine. A fragrance drifted over and attracted his attention. Su Len looked up and saw that lunch was ready. He put down his thoughts and took out his utensils to enjoy the delicious meal. The main dish for lunch was a Mongolian gazelle, which had been roasted and sprinkled with a layer of special seasoning. Su Luen ate a large piece of it. There was also a pot of fish soup in an iron pot next to him. In addition to fish, there were also some plant tubers in it. After eating the roasted meat, a large bowl of fish soup was filled. Su Len enjoyed the food with a satisfied expression. However, as soon as the fish soup entered his mouth, his expression suddenly changed. He quickly drank a few more mouthfuls as if to confirm something. "Robin, who made the soup today?" Su Len shouted in surprise. "What's wrong, boss? Is there a problem with the soup?" Robin's expression changed and he looked around vigilantly. "Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with the soup," Su Len quickly explained when he saw Robin's nervous expression. "And it tastes good. I just want to know who made the soup." "Is that so?" "Today's soup was made by Bard. He's standing guard over there. I'll call him over." Robin quickly came over with a barbarian warrior. "You're Bard?" "Yes, boss. I'm Bard. I joined the territory with the Boulder leader," Bard said excitedly. Su Len nodded and pointed at the bowl of soup. "You made the soup today?" "Yes." "What method did you use to make it sweet?" Su Luen hurriedly asked after getting the confirmation. "Oh, you're asking about the beetroot, right?" Bard said with realization. "You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.